A very warm welcome to you all, to our panel, More Than Just Foul Play, Racism in Football. First of all, we do have the possibility to translate this into English because Gerald Asamoah will speak in German. If there is anybody who needs a translation, you can pick up your headphones at the very end of this room. Okay. In 2 days, the 2018 FIFA World Cup will kick off in Russia, and it's all about goals, matches, and the trophy at the end, obviously. Emotions are key at this event. Football gives us joy, tears, and big drama. And obviously we all love this, but there is a dark side in football that we don't like and don't love: discrimination and racism. And unfortunately, the problem still exists nowadays. It's possible that we have perhaps underestimated the problem in the past, and that we didn't see the right dimension of the problem, which could even affect this upcoming World Cup in Russia. And that is what I would like to talk with you today. And my name is Joscha Weber. I'm working for Deutsche Welle as head of online sports, and I'm very pleased to have you all here. And my guests are Gerald Asamoah, former pro footballer for Schalke 04. He was the runner-up in the FIFA World Cup in 2002. We all remember this quite a while ago, right now. But yeah, you've won the German Cup twice with Schalke 04, and today you're working for Schalke 04 as ambassador, team manager for the youth team, and you are very active in the fight against discrimination. So welcome to Gerald Asamoah. Second, Christoph Ruf, journalist and author of books about football culture, but as well politics, and sometimes both worlds mix. People tend to say no, it's different, but in fact it's linked. And he works for big German media outlets such as Spiegel, Süddeutsche Zeitung, or Zeit, and please an applause for Christoph Ruf. And third, but not last, Patrick Gasser, head of football and social responsibility at the European Football Union, UEFA. Before joining the UEFA in 1999, he has worked for 13 years at the International Committee of the Red Cross, and now he's here for the UEFA. A warm welcome to Patrick Gasser. I'm glad to have you here, and yeah, I would like to show you a video. Perhaps my assistant could just start the first video of the day to show you what this panel is all about. You have to switch the screen to full screen and then restart the video, please, again. And then please restart. Okay.
I think it's stupid. It's very unnecessary, because at the end of the day, we're all human. We all came on this earth. Doesn't matter what color you are. There's different religions.
Das verstehe ich nicht, ja, heutzutage so über Rassismus noch sprechen, ne, und so passiert. Das ist einfach traurig und ich kämpfe auch, ich versuche ein Teil zu sein, dass die in Zukunft nicht mehr machen.
We have a lot of nationalities on the planet, but at the end of the day it's just one human race.
Chase racism off the pitch.
That is the question, Gerald Asamoah. Is football doing enough? Tut der Fußball genug gegen Rassismus?
Ja, also genug. Ich meine, das Problem ist ja nur, dass wir heute hier sitzen.
Today, and we are talking about this problem. Well, football is a model role, and you have also, for example, lots of people playing together from all the nations. So therefore, we football players have to be model roles, and we have to try to change young people, and they have to be encouraged to be strong, because it's not of any use to talk about this, about racism. But if you experience it personally, what it means, it's so strong. Therefore, we can be more models to show that you can do things in a different way. And sometimes you are then sitting in a team and together, and you have to be then successful together. You have to join forces. So can we do something as football players? We have to talk about it openly.
We will learn about this later during this discussion. Christoph Ruf, in 2016 the FIFA disbanded its anti-racism task force. We were all a bit astonished about that, because they say its mission had been completely fulfilled, as they said. Is that true?
No. I think if it was true, we wouldn't sit here. So obviously it's not true. But it depends on a closer look. So it depends on which country you talk about, which region you talk about, which league you talk about. I would dare say that in Germany, the open evident racism has rather decreased, which doesn't mean it has disappeared. But I'm not sure if things that happened to Gerald Asamoah in '97 in Cottbus would happen again in 2018. But I'm quite sure that the attitude of some supporters in this city, for example, in this city, hasn't changed that much, but the way it is shown has changed a lot. And whereas in Eastern European countries, in some Eastern European countries, we have still these phenomena like throwing bananas, racist chants, etc. So it depends on what you look at.
So we do talk more about it, Christoph Ruf, but does this help the things to change, or is it just the coverage in the media? Is it just the public discussion that it changed?
Well, I think it's positive that the public discussion has changed and that media have understood that it's a subject. But what is more important is what happens in the stadiums, what happens among the supporter scenes. And this is, I'm not an expert in Eastern European football, but I think in Germany this was very helpful, that there were supporters, organizations like BAFF, BAF, or Unsere Kurve, Pro-Fans, etc., who focused very much on racism and anti-racism. And yeah, I think the attitude in ultra groups is quite different from the attitude that was reigning 20 years ago when it was not the ultras but the hooligans who were the dominating group in the stadiums. And so I think what matters most is what happens inside the supporter scenes, not in the media.
Patrick Gasser, you work on projects and campaigns to fight discrimination and racism in football for the UEFA. From your point of view, how has the problem developed during the last decades?
Well, thanks for the question, and happy to be here to represent UEFA. How has it developed? If I go back to the beginning of the new century, UEFA was under heavy pressure by non-governmental organizations, by the European Commission, because of acts of racism, discrimination in and around football, and we were seen as doing nothing against it. Now that has dramatically changed. In the meantime, we have gone in partnership with best-in-class non-governmental organization called the FAIR Network, and have developed campaigns, but also educational projects. And then on the other hand, we're also looking at sanctioning clubs, players, or the supporters of players through the clubs. So there is quite a system in place, but I would also like to emphasize that the phenomenon of racism and discrimination is one of society. And unfortunately, there are groups which take advantage of the venue, the stadium, and then that sort of thing becomes apparent. Now, it might be rather easy to kick, racism, discrimination out of the football arena, but it wouldn't basically solve the problems we have in society. So you can ask, football to make a contribution to society, to go against that sort of behavior, and we are in behavior change there. This is much more complicated than on the same platform to sell a commercial product. So that's the challenge, and you see it from all sides. You see it from the spectator sides, from the player sides, etc. And perhaps at that point, if I could just have the video for 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Okay. Maybe you can. It's the second one. Yes.
Dizemos não ao racismo.
Nein zum Rassismus.
Nein til racismo.
Non au racisme.
Antiracismo.
No al racismo.
So just as an illustration of a campaign, and I think, if I remember correctly, at the occasion where Schalke was playing Champions League, Mr. Asamoah was part of an earlier version of that one. We started in 2008, had it systematically aired at the halftime Champions League. I think you don't find a better advertising time, so we didn't sell it. We kept it. It has over a season a conservative commercial value of 20 million euros. It's tough from our side, from the CSR side, to keep hold on those 30 seconds, so they are not being commercialized. But that sort of thing penetrates all levels of society. But it's only one aspect. But we use here the star players of the game to get a message to the public that this is simply not acceptable. Thank you.
You've just showed us this long-running campaign of UEFA. Could you explain us perhaps the outcome, in your opinion, of these campaigns? Is there a change?
As I already said, we are in behavior change here. And the more you look into the issue, the better you observe the games, the more sanctions you have. That doesn't necessarily mean that the situation globally has become worse. Statistically, yes, because we are closer to the issue. We have a better handle on it, and therefore sanctions are up. So the measurement of behavior changes is much more complicated. I mean, you could send out sociologists and try to measure that. But given the political climate we are in right now, in Europe, I think there is a tendency that there is more pressure on, and that sort of things is more likely than to happen than perhaps 5 years ago. Again, as it is very much a reflection of society. But what it did for us, from the media side, we are not anymore under the media fire for doing nothing. I think the efforts which have been made over the past 15 years have been recognized. And why do we work with an NGO like the FAIR Network? Because that's their core business. They are specialized in this. Our core business is, managing football and putting on top-notch competitions like the Champions League or the European Championships, and I think we are not doing such a bad job on that level. But like in this area or many other areas, we work with NGOs whose expertise we know. These are the very same people who had a go at us, yelled and kicked and screamed. So we are in a partnership with these people. We count on their expertise to tell us how we should go best to tackle racism, discrimination, to make progress.
Gerard Asamoah, talking about racism in football is one thing, having experienced it is another. I think you might remember this day when you traveled to Rostock for a German Cup match back in 2006, I think it was. Could you explain us what happened that day? Sie haben Ihre eigenen Erfahrungen mit Rassismus ja gemacht. Können Sie uns da noch mal mitnehmen, was an diesem Tag in Rostock damals 2006 passiert ist?
Ja, es war...
Yes. It was, we had a cup game, Champions game in Rostock, and it was shortly after the World Championship. It was the summer tale in Germany, and lots of people came to Germany, which felt very well in Germany, and we were part of the national team. And 1 month later, I was in Rostock, and when I arrived there, I also noticed that there was a strange mood that tried to be relaxed. I thought it couldn't be against me, but during the match, with every contact with of the ball, then I had a feeling, and then I understood what people were saying. It hurt really, and you're part of the team. And I was there in 2006, and was also then committed. And 1 month later, it was forgotten everything. So, but I thought it will continue, and then my coach said, "Do you want to go out?" And I said no. And then I went during the break. My my coach said, "Do you want to get out of the match?" And but I continued playing this match. But the disappointment was so deep because I did not want to understand that shortly after the World Championship, so how could people react or behave in this way? And it was really a tough moment for me, and I also was thinking whether I should continue playing for this country. But I consider myself as German. It really hurt. Not so much, because I always say not all people are the same way, and I have people around me who accept me, whom I appreciate, and there are of course silly people to say this in this with words who do not really understand these things, and these certain people cannot be changed. But it's maybe important to fight that young people think another way. And I have 3 children now, 11 and 8, and I hope that my children can have a peaceful life, enjoy life, and be accepted. And therefore, I say that I want to continue here fighting, that young people understand that we all belong together.
You just told me before, some minutes ago, that your son is playing football too. You're in close contact as team manager for team in Schalke 04, and you're in close contact with the pro players too. So you talk about these kind of topics, I suppose. Do the players, the recent players, do the youth players tell you about experiences, similar experiences like you have witnessed them before too?
Ja, es geht. Also
well, it's from time to time. And there are certain negative experiences. My son, for example, he experienced something on the pitch also similar, and a guy named him nigger, and it was also very nice, very sweet that the coach said, well, it's the son of Asamoah, so be careful. This is so nice. And And if it wouldn't be the son of Asamoah, what would happen then? But young people should understand that we are all the same. And I'm laughing about it, but there are also bad things. For example, there are nice things or certain things where something happens. For example, my young girl went into the primary school first class, and there was a nice guy from the neighborhood and said, "Oh, this black guy, I want to collect things for her because she doesn't have anything to put on." And the mother said, "Why? Well, she's a black girl." And she went through the list and said, "Asamoah, so do you know who she is? Is this the daughter of Asamoah? They have enough money." But it was so early, so nice that this girl was, somebody wanted to help her, and that it's important that little girls understand we can understand each other. It doesn't matter where we come from, and therefore I like to tell these stories because it touches very much, and this is an important thing.
And I would like to share another story with you, another video we would like to show you of Divock Origi. Divock Origi is playing for VfL Wolfsburg and the Belgium national team. Unfortunately not at the World Cup, but normally he's playing for them. And he shared his story with us in our interview, and I would like to show you this story.
I remember I was playing a game with the under-13s. Still young, I was playing well, I scored 2 goals, and just this parent, I think was my opposing defender, his dad just started racially abusing me on the pitch, just shouting all types of stuff, you know. I remember after the game breaking down, in tears, crying, just asking why would somebody just attack you for no reason, just because, I don't know, you're playing well, or he's using something so sensitive. So, yeah, I spoke with my dad about it, with my family, and I just, from then on, I just believe that you have to fight this with love, just being strong, preaching the message, and just showing love to everyone. It made my love for other cultures even stronger, and yeah, that's my story.
Thank you. Christoph Ruf, strong words by Origi. Is this the solution? Could we handle racism with love?
Depends on the temperament you have. I'm afraid it's not mine, I think. But my son also plays football. He's 11 years old. And well, I don't want to go on telling optimistic things all the times, but when I watch their training sessions, I see that they're that much mixed. There's so many nations. There's so many colors of the skin. They don't even realize that they are different. If I ask one of the kids, well, who gave you the Coke, or who did foul play? He wouldn't say the black one, but he would say the one with the red trousers, or with the white socks, or with a funny shirt or something. So they don't even realize that 20 years ago they would have been considered as different. I think that's a big progress. And on the rest, it's what Mr. Gasser says. It has to do with the society we live in. We have a right-wing party in the parliament with 15%. We have the attitude of 15–20% of the population who tend to right-wing parties, to right-wing attitudes. And just last week I read a quote of an AfD deputy, I think in Saxony or so, who said exactly what the racist supporters in Rostock confronted him with 12 years ago. He said, if a horse is born in a cow stable, it will not be a cow. So this is the racist thinking, and this, well, it's yeah, it's not a taboo. There are 15–20% of the population, at least, who have these attitudes, and this is the problem.
But Tegasa, there's one point which was interesting to me. You mentioned these sanctions. You stressed before the zero tolerance policy by UEFA towards racism in the stadium. Could you give us some examples of measures of sanctions against clubs or players in the past?
Well, there is a procedure in place, and again, I have to refer to our partnership with the FAIR network. So if we have a Champions League or a Europa League draw, we look at the games, and the experts from FAIR are going to rate them high risk, medium risk, or low risk. And then for the high risk games, we arrange for 2 match observers from the FAIR network to be present. These observers know the clubs, they know the regional culture, because if you have a game up in Scotland to monitor, and you have a match observer from UEFA, from Iceland, for example, or from Tallinn, he has no clue about the bigotry songs up there, which address sort of the religious divide. So you need experts on the field. And then if these observers come across evidence of these acts of discrimination, they record them, and they become part of the legal proceedings and part of the reporting procedure. And then these reports, together with the report of the referee and the match delegate, go then to the control and disciplinary body. So there is an independent instance which then looks at these cases and imposes sanctions. Now, in sound legal proceedings, you sort of look at the case at its own merits, and then you impose sanctions. Can be a fine. In a repeated incident, you close a section of the stadium, but then we're getting heavily criticized by supporter groups because they call it mass punishment. And if you then have a repeated incident involving the same clubs or the same supporters from a club, then it goes as far as playing a match behind closed doors. And I think a professional football player can confirm there is nothing more sort of an unpleasant thing to do than play a match behind in an empty stadium. So that's sort of the level of sanctioning. It is also delicate because sometimes there are other incidents which perhaps receive a higher sanction than the racist incident, but it's again all on the merits of the individual case which is taken into consideration. Then another measure is also that we have a 3-step procedure for the referee to stop a game. In the second step, to stop the game, take the players back to the dressing rooms, and if the situation doesn't improve, it can go all the way to abandon the match. Now, before abandoning a match, you have to also appreciate the global situation of security. What will that mean in that specific stadium, given the constellation to do that? Practice has shown that up to second step, the results were achieved and the match could continue. FIFA has now adapted the same procedure for the World Cup. Hopefully it will never have to apply, but that's are some concrete measures on the field of play which are part of the game organization right now.
Thank you for the overview, Christopher. Perhaps we should stick for a moment to this aspect of the mass punishment. If we have some supporters, so-called supporters, crying these ape chants from the stadium, what is your opinion? Should we punish all the supporters, all the fans, by having this kind of matches without spectators? What is the right sanction against racism in the stadiums?
Well, I'm rather skeptical as for mass punishment, because it causes often effects of solidarity. So supporters think this is an unjust generalization and solidarize with the people who are not worth it. I have an example. It's maybe 10 years. It happened maybe 10 years ago. It was in the Hamburg Stadium, Hamburg SV Stadium, where a female supporter heard a racist chant and went to a steward and denounced the man who was yelling it. and well, she had the wide support of the team manager, of the officials of the club, and the guy was thrown out. I think that's the way how it has to work. That the ones who are in blame are being punished, and not everyone, because it's a hard thing. If I don't pay my rent, I don't want my neighbor to be sacked.
Gerald, we're still searching for the right answer to that question of racism. There's one other example what players could do. Nigeria's William Trost Ekong said some weeks ago, if there is a racism during the World Cup in Russia, we will make a decision. If one player says he doesn't want to play, then everyone would stick with that. So what do you think about this? Would that be a strong sign against racism during the World Cup if a team will leave the pitch?
Es ist ein Zeichen. Es ist ein Zeichen.
It is a symbol to do what you think is correct. But of course you have to challenge this, because it is a World Cup, and participating in a World Cup is key. So if you want to abandon that and give in for just something small, I think it's a good thing what he says, but I would still challenge it. To say it can't be true. I've worked all years to be part of a World Cup. Like, for example, if you're winning, you go to the semi-finals, and then you will have to question, well, would you really give in? You might not withdraw from the tournament, but you could come up with some symbolic response. So people went on their knees, like in American football, so to say, okay, leaving a World Cup, this is something which I might not want to share as a team, because I love the sport. Of course, you have to be symbolic, but I would do everything to get there if I love the sport, and to give in. It's a difficulty. Surrendering and giving in is something that makes others win, and this is why I said beforehand, just leaving the pitch isn't helpful. I would say, I don't care what you're doing, I want to play here and I'm going to be successful here. But at the end of the day, if the team will take a decision, then of course I think it's quite courageous. And I've realized that someone wanted to leave the pitch and the whole team joined in. If he had gone on his own and then there would be a replacement player, that wouldn't have been nice. So the whole team left at that instance.
So we're talking about a sign for solidarity, Patrick Gasser. Could this be the very last option for teams, for clubs to react on this sort of problem?
Well, of course, it's an option. But Mr. Asamoah said, you know, the complications this has and the impact it has, and to go all the way and to go to that step. But I would also like to come back to what Mr. Roof said. Because his example was an example of sort of a peer control, where another fan took action in order to now denounce one. And I think that's also the appeal we have to supporters among themselves, to sort of influence the minority which commits these acts of discrimination, which is probably the most effective measure if one would get that sort of system into place. Because, I mean, we don't like to close sections, or we certainly don't like to have to play matches behind closed doors.
Christoph Ruf, let's stick a bit to the World Cup 2018, the upcoming. A recent report by the FAIR network, we have just talked about it, mentioned that there is a sharp increase of the number of racist chants, including monkey chants in Russian football, and the number of homophobic displays is on the rise too there. In total, there have been 80 racist or far-right actions in Russian football during the last year. What does this tell us about the host of the next World Cup, in your opinion?
I'm not sure if there's an automatism that you can say, because the situation in Russian club football is, as you have described it, because of that, the World Cup will turn out in a catastrophe. I think that the Russian government, if you like it or not, I don't, has strong police measures and a strong interest to show a beautiful Russian face to the world. So, I think there will be certain things will be under control, but this is only the surface. What is much more important is what's below the surface, and people. We all know how the situation in Poland or in Russia is, what concerns the attitude of football hooligans, or of a majority of the football hooligans. And I think the fact that it's now known by people is due to the monitoring, which wasn't existent 10 years ago. But I don't think it's a new phenomenon. I think it's something that we know now, but that we should have known before.
Patrick Gasser, the Russian authorities are expected not to allow a single violent incident by using all kind of law enforcement and even intelligence for this. Is deterrence perhaps one key to prevent discrimination and racism during a tournament like the World Cup in Russia?
Well, I think it spoils a little bit the atmosphere. But I would also bet that the security measures in place are high, and I would also like to emphasize what Mr. Roof said, that you cannot compare the dynamics in national club football to the dynamics of the supporters following the national teams. There is a different one, and club football dynamics are the higher risk, definitely the higher risk. We experienced that when we organized the European Championship 2012 in Poland and Ukraine. And if you look at Polish football on the national club level, or at Ukrainian football and the national club level, there was a BBC piece on that, and just weeks before the Euro, there was a horrific picture painted, and it reflected the true situation in club football. But then what happens at an international tournament like a Euro and the World Cup is not as high risk as club football matches are on national team level. And while I say that, I remember that we had one bad incident at the Euro 2016 in Marseille with Russian supporters had a go at the English, but that was more violence and hooliganism and not so much racism discrimination per se, but it doesn't make it any better.
It doesn't. Gerald Asamoah, if you hear these kind of numbers from Russia, from the Russian football, 80 racist incidents during the last year, what are your feelings ahead of the World Cup?
Ich bin da.
World Cup. I would like to open up the discussion to you all. It's your turn, it's your time. You could ask the speakers questions, and we do have the first here at the on my left side.
Yes, hello, my name is Tina Adomako, and I'm not a football fan or a soccer fan, except when Ghana's playing. They're not playing this year. But I have a question for Mr. Gasser. why, and I don't know exactly how countries get chosen to host the World Cup, but if something like this is known about Russia, wouldn't it be just the most simple thing to not give them the World Cup and give it to another country? Or is this a very, very naive question?
No, thanks for the question. There are no naive questions as far as I'm concerned. It's a very good question. Now, there are two ways to looking at this. Either you make this a killer criteria and exclude nations like that from hosting a mega event. And then if you look at mega sporting events like the Olympic Games or a FIFA World Cup or a Euro, then yes, would we have had Olympic Games in China, or would we have taken a World Cup to Brazil and so on, or would we take a World Cup to Qatar in terms of human rights? So you could exclude them, or you could sort of congratulate the organizations who take a competition to a context like this. Then it makes it a topic. The media picks it up, civil society talks about it, and we are talking about this issue here and today. And if FIFA hadn't awarded within their decision-making process from at the time to organize a World Cup in Russia, the problems in Russia wouldn't be a media topic right now. Just to put that in perspective again, there are so many contexts across the world where the human rights situation, the discrimination level is just as high, if not worse. Nobody talks about it because there is no mega sporting event. And as was already mentioned before, there is this chance and opportunity to bring this to light, to discuss it, to work on it with the organization, and hopefully make progress for the future. As Mr. Asamao said, there are players coming, there are supporters coming from all walks and lives and colors, and hopefully have a good time, and that will sort of ease up the situation and give it a chance. So yes, there are two thoughts of schools. I'm the one who would rather take the chance and make that aspect not the only killer criteria, but work on it and hope for progress in the future.
More questions here in the middle. Please present yourself and your organization you're coming from.
Hi, I'm Sérgio Calu from TV Zimbo in Angola. I wanted to ask Mr. Gesser a question. We've talked about fans, and we've talked about racism on the fans' perspective towards the players. Recently, there's a player, Yaya Touré, who spoke about a coach being a racist, which is Pep Guardiola. And he's not the first one, and this is not new. And the media, the European media, is sort of like pushing it, saying, oh, but Pep Guardiola was mean to Joe Hart as well, and he's white. Which is sort of like brainwashing it, making it like sort of like disappear. You've talked about sanctions. Are there sanctions to coaches and team presidents and things like that? Basically that's it.
Yeah, I read about that specific case on my way here via Copenhagen. What I can say to this, we can only act and come into play when the actual discrimination happens within a football game which we control, so be it Champions League or Europa League. If things of that sort happen within Manchester City as a club, then I think the first instance would be for the club authorities to look into the issue. Then it's the FA and the Premier League who need to look at that sort. So that there are levels of responsibility. You also understand if we have incident of racial discrimination in any sort in the Bundesliga, it's not FIFA and it's not UEFA acting, but that's then the responsibility of the competent German football authorities who are in charge of these respective clubs. And then it also depends on the level of evidence. I may perhaps refer to the Brewster case. This is a young Liverpool player, 18 years of age. There were allegations of him brought to the table of having suffered from discrimination, abuse in UEFA competitions and FIFA competitions. This was looked into. It just boiled then down to a situation in terms of evidence where you had word against word, and in the sound legal systems we have in Western Europe, in a situation like that, the judgment goes in favor of the accused, and the person is acquitted. That's just the way it is. But if you have good, transparent evidence, then I'm sure that sort of thing would be sanctioned.
Thank you, Mr. Gasser. First, we have the gentleman in green and red in the fourth row.
Hi, my name is Manuel from University of Cologne. I have a question to Mr. Asamoah. Can I ask in German?
Of course.
Yeah. So, Herr Asamoah, ich wollte mal fragen, und zwar, wie sehen Sie die Entwicklung der Ultraszene in Deutschland innerhalb der letzten, sage ich mal, 10 Jahre? Besonders unter dem Hintergrund, dass es viele Projekte gibt der Ultraszene, vor allen Dingen, weil es eine große Subkultur ist, die immer weiter wächst in Deutschland, immer mehr Jugendliche schließen sich da an. Es gibt viele Projekte, ein Beispiel Mainz 05, ich glaube Eintracht Frankfurt hatte ein Projekt mit Anthony Yeboah damals, auch in der 1. FC Köln gibt es viele sehr, ich sag mal, linksaktive Ultraszenen. Wie sehen Sie den Hintergrund und wie sehen Sie die Entwicklung?
Sehr, sehr gut. Ich meine, ich habe bei uns auf Schalke, ich kann ja sehr, sehr viel dann von Schalke reden, weil ich ja lange auf Schalke bin, wo ich sehr gute Bindung zu Ultras habe, mit denen ich sehr, sehr viel mache. Und man sieht schon, dass sie schon der Macht sind und versuchen halt auch mit dieser Art und Weise den Verein halt so zu kriegen.
To coin also the club, and that young people join us. And therefore we say always that we have a role model. We do a lot against racism in the ultra scene. And there's a right-wing scene which was very negative, but now we have the ultras who are fighting also against this. And this also, of course, civil encouragement, which you need, and to say people, you need to say people, it's wrong what you're doing there, and you can achieve a lot by doing this. So it's great, Mr. Asamoah, that he's talking English, not English, but German. I would be able to talk English, but it's not so perfect, so I prefer English. So unfortunately, I never managed to learn English. So Gerald Asamoah, why are there lots of politicians? So German politicians. So, and if you want to explain them difficult problems, so they'll compare it with football. So we have 10% of racists in football. It's a black side of football, but it's also a light side in football. Lots of policymakers who cannot explain certain problems, they talk about football. Why? Why do you use football as an example? Well, I'm not a policy maker, but of course football coins a lot and moves people a lot, and with football you have lots of cultures and they have one objective: to be successful. It doesn't matter where you come from, but it's only important to be successful, and therefore we have always a role, we are a role model for policy makers, maybe, but I cannot talk politics and race in connection with
Hi, I'm Shelley. I'm a journalist here in Germany. I've reported on the topic of racism in Germany. I'm just curious to know from anyone on the panel your insight on this topic. just hearing what you all had to say, yes, we're looking at racism in football, but one statement was made today about how this is something in society. So I'm just curious whether the football industry in some way has been highlighting that or taking any action. Just based on my own reporting, I've come to find that racism could be a bit of a structural issue in Germany, so it goes far beyond just football. Is the industry addressing that? In what way? Is there education, let's say, for younger people in schools? Is there any kind of effort to speak with the authorities when it comes to this issue? Any thoughts?
Wenn ich schon verstanden habe, dann antworte ich ein bisschen drauf. Ich meine, was Sie sagen, auch
So,
zum Beispiel, ich mache ja so eine Aktion.
I'm carrying out actions, so just to encourage civil society against racism, and the schools which are then committed, they get some posters against racism, and I'm part of the team, go to schools and talk to children, see the young people there, that we are all this, and we tell them that we are all the same, and we talk the guys that we are all the same in a very clear way. And the young people then are committed here, and we tell them, well, we are doing something against this issue. And if you talk with young people, then if they have the idea that they have to help other people, then you reach more. And this is what we are doing in schools. Maybe you can also add something if you want.
If I may, I would like to say something regarding that in connection to the spot I showed. That we try to make it compulsory for all the rights holders who are allowed to show that spot at halftime 30 seconds. But I can tell you it is extremely difficult to make that obligation happen. So there is also my appeal to the people from the communication side, to sort of cut down on the studio interviews with Oliver Kahn and company and spare those 30 seconds to show the spot, because that's not always happening. So I think everybody, like in a football team, needs to make a contribution to this.
Media, the players and the federations, everybody should do it. Okay, we do have another question here in the fifth row. This gentleman.
Thank you very much. My name is Matthew Carrington. I'm from the UK, if you couldn't tell because of my accent. Just speaking from my experience, last year in the UK we had our women's national team manager, Mark Sampson, have to leave his job because of allegations of systemic racism and bullying of non-white members of the women's team. My question towards, another thing, there was the report about black, Asian and ethnic minority managers in the UK. You can count how many ethnic minority managers there are in the UK on one hand. So my question to Mr. Gasser is, could you please comment on the state of racism within the women's game? And could you also just say what UEFA are doing in terms of promoting opportunities for black and ethnic minority backgrounds in terms of management? And my question to Mr. Asamoah, have you experienced any forms of systemic racism, any blocks in terms of your management career? And do you wish to pursue management further in the future?
Okay, thanks for those questions. Now I would put this under the chapter of institutional discrimination. Now we not only have to look at the number of coaches representing an ethnic minority, and I agree this is completely out of balance if you put that in relations to the players on the field, and most or more and more sort of coaches have passed at least to a certain level as top-notch player, and that's an issue. There is this idea to improve that situation through the Rooney Rule. I think there are sport institutions and national associations who try to adopt that. The Rooney Rule, who are not familiar with it, simply says that if you go into a recruitment process and and look at, replace a new coach, among the 3 or 4 you interview, there should be one person or one coach of an ethnic minority to give him a better chance to qualify. Now, we as UEFA are simply not in a position to control that sort of mechanism, but that's the Rooney Rule is a system which comes from the United States. So that's one sort of measure you might be familiar with, looked at. But then you sort of can push it further. You know, how many women we have here on the panel, and how many do we have at the executive committee at UEFA? It is 1, and I remember the proposal we had on table was for 3 at the time, and it was watered down to 1. So a small success. I agree with everybody in here, that's far from insufficient for the time being. What has happened most recently now is that sort in terms of stakeholder management, the executive committee was open to 2 representatives from European Club Association, to 1 representative from European League. But what did they do? They filled the position with 3 men. So yes, we have a long way to go. You can also ask the question why so many men are coaching, heading the coaching team of a women's national team. Germany is a very good example here, although they sort of lured away the Swiss coach of the Swiss female team to replace their not so successful last coach. That's one to look at. You can look at the administration level, how many women are in leader position hierarchy-wise. The staffing at UEFA is about 50-50. Then again, you can look at the diversity of it. We have about 37 or 38 nationalities from across Europe and the world working there. If you come from London, you know, London has this wonderful diversity which also expresses itself through color. But then if you look at the history, you know, at the notorious history of colonialism, which sort of is the result of that process, and it's wonderful right now, but there was a price to pay. Most of continental Europe, I would dare say, do not have that same history, fortunately, and are predominantly not as colorful. So, huge topic. I think we could make a session only on that, but yes.
That's for sure. The second question was addressed to Gerald Asamoah concerning your role as team manager.
As team manager,
if I get it right, was it? Yeah. As team manager there.
And would you want to?
Your experiences, the experiences.
Oh no. I mean, people do know me by heart, and they know that I'm fighting against racism and never experienced anything negative. I didn't get that question right in the beginning. I thought that my former manager was racist, and I wanted to add on that. I don't know whether that's racism, but I do recall that my former manager, Rudi Assauer, called me Blondie. And Schalke, everybody calls me Blondie. I'm just Blondie on Schalke. It is just funny, it's no racism. It was Rudi Assauer. And besides, nothing as a manager I experienced in negative terms.
We do have space for one more question. The gentleman in the third row.
Sorry, it's my last one. One question for Mr. Ruff as a journalist, and one question for Asamoah. We're talking about countries and racism. And why do you think the media is focusing so much on racism in Russia when Italy and Spain have a lot of racism, and it seems no one talks about them? That's one question. And for Asamoah, I wanted to ask you, as a player, as an experience, there's an issue with black players and age. Okay, I'll give you an example. In Portugal, for example, Renato Sanches, when he appeared, he was 18, and people are saying, no way, he's not 18 because the way he plays. Only when he came to Bayern Munich, They said, oh, he's 18 because he can't play, you know. But then, with the same age, Bernardo Silva was the same age, went to play for the same team, Benfica, and now he's playing for Manchester City, and no one ever says that he's not that age because he's not black. In your experience and as a youth coach, what experience do you have when it comes to the age of young black players? Thank you.
Well, as for journalism, maybe I have sometimes the impression that what Russia does is often seen in the West in a more critical way than it has to be. I'm not sure if Putin is the bigger danger for world peace or Trump. That's one answer, and the other is I'm not sure if what happens in Spain and Italy is really left aside. I've read a lot of articles about what happens in some teams in Italy. The Boateng case was published. There were many discussions about it. Also Spain. I'm not sure if you're right in your estimation that nobody talks about Italy and Spain, but that we have I agree with you that we have the tendency to see Russia more critical in some ways than maybe is fair. And there's another tendency in journalism which I criticize, is that it always takes an event. Yeah. It always takes an event in order to be published. If there are positive effects, nobody will write about it. I personally have often written about what happened in Cottbus or Lok Leipzig, and 10 years ago, there were racist incidents in Leipzig, and if you had an interview with the pressman or with the president, he would always say, "No, that's an invention of the press. This has never happened." And even if the evidence was clear as everything, he would have said it's not true. Now, some weeks ago, it was the opposite. It was it was the case that a youth manager training 16-year-old boys. Made them raise the right arm. So there were photos taken of that. But there was no press journalist or no outstanding person who would have noticed that. And it was the club who was publishing it, who said, okay, there's something terrible that happened here, and he was firing the two coaches. So that was a good sign, I think, because it was not under press pressure, but it was by their own will. So this was the sign. We do not pronounce ourselves against racism because the public wants us to do so, but because it's our own attitude. And this was a strong sign, and I would have appreciated if the press would have covered this in a much larger way. It didn't happen.
The story about Sanchez. I heard about the Sanchez story, and I've felt myself how it is when you're a good player, you're older, and when you're not, you're younger. But with Anthony, for example, people said allegedly he was younger. But if you're older and you're still a good player, it's also nice, isn't it? And the co-players also might say, okay, he's 40, I'm 20, and he's better than I am. But then you really have to challenge yourself, right? I've got one son who was born in Germany. It was also on the news, and then I had a speed fine. So because I went to his tournament, and then people said, he's so old, he's not a 2007 guy. Then I say, are you honest? Are you serious? I mean, he's so good, he's much better than the others. But you have a mobile phone, go on Google, enter the name, and then check when he was born. It's Asamoah's son. You only think he's older, and that's why. So this is prejudice, pure prejudice. And of course, there are also some examples where people made the mistake and then changed their path. But still, we shouldn't all So we're all the same. I wouldn't say all Germans are racist. Of course not. There are some who are just not open-minded and others who are. And we shouldn't consider everything so negatively.
Thank you, Gerald. What words at the end of this discussion. I do have just one very last and very short question to all of you, and perhaps it would be a bit more pleasant one. Gerald, who will win the World Cup?
Are they Uruguay? Are they even playing? Of course, I would wish and hope that we're going to make it, but I think it's going to be very difficult. It's always the same ones like Spain, France, Brazil, but well. If we go to the semi-finals, we can make it, but otherwise I think it's going to be Spain or Brazil. And go for one, go for one. I'd say Germany, that's my best choice maybe. I'm only allowed to mention one country, that's Brazil.
I need to explain this. When the invitation came to UEFA to be part of this, it was addressed to Peter Chilieron. This is the president of the Swiss Football Association. And for those who don't know, we are also playing. So, Hop Schwyz.
Thank you, everybody, for having you with us, and you too. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the Global Media Forum. Dankeschön.